I've always known I was a shadow in my family, the one who didn't quite fit. It wasn't something they said outright, at least not at first, but it was there, lurking beneath every glance, every word, every decision. My earliest memory of this truth is burned into my mind like a scar that refuses to fade. Sophia and I were only 7 when it happened. We had been playing near the edge of our driveway, chasing each other with laughter as children do, when a car came speeding around the corner too fast. Its tires screeched, but not quickly enough. The impact sent us both flying. When I woke up later in the hospital waiting room, dazed and aching all over, I couldn't understand why no one was paying attention to me. My parents were huddled together by the bed where Sophia lay, her leg wrapped in a thick cast, tears streaming down their faces. They whispered frantically about how lucky we were that she'd only broken a bone, that it could have been so much worse. But what about me? I wanted to scream. Didn't they see the blood staining my shirt from the gash on my forehead? Couldn't they hear the way my ribs throbbed with every shallow breath? Hours passed before anyone even noticed I was still sitting alone in the corner, clutching my knees to my chest. When my mother finally turned to look at me, her eyes flickered briefly, guilt or irritation. I couldn't tell, and then she sighed. "Oh, Emma," she muttered, handing me an ice pack without meeting my gaze. "You'll be fine." That moment stayed with me, growing heavier over the years until it became the foundation of everything else. The endless comparisons, the dismissive comments, the quiet erasure of my existence whenever Sophia entered the picture. It wasn't just neglect, it was something deeper, more deliberate, as if loving her meant forgetting I existed at all. The pattern repeated itself throughout my childhood, each instance chipping away at whatever fragile sense of self-worth I might have had. Take the time I won first place in the national academic competition, for example. I remember standing on stage, clutching the trophy, my heart swelling with pride. For once, I thought, maybe they'll see me. Maybe they'll realize I'm worth something too. But when I got home, the reaction was muted. My father glanced at the certificate briefly, nodding absent-mindedly, while my mother patted my shoulder and said, "Good job, sweetheart. Now, Sophia, how did your math test go?" Still top 5 in the class, Sophia smiled sweetly, launching into a detailed account of her perfect score, and just like that, the spotlight shifted. I stood frozen in the doorway, holding my trophy like an idiot, wondering why I'd bothered to try in the first place. Then there was my 16th birthday, a day I'd secretly hoped would finally make me feel special. Instead, it only drove the knife deeper. Sophia's party was extravagant, complete with balloons, catered food, and a live band. She wore a designer dress and sparkled under the glittering lights, laughing as friends surrounded her with gifts and admiration. Meanwhile, mine was a quiet affair confined to the dining table. My mother handed me a small box containing a cheap silver bracelet, saying casually, "It's just something to use for now." "For now?" I echoed, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Yes, dear," she replied, already turning away. "We'll get you something nicer next year if you keep improving." Improving. That word haunted me. No matter what I did, it was never enough. If Sophia shone like the sun, then I was merely the pale moonlight reflecting off her brilliance. And yet, somehow, I kept trying anyway, clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, they'd see me for who I truly was. Everything changed the day I met Lucas. It was during one of my shifts at the cafe where I worked part-time. He walked in wearing an expensive suit, his hair slightly windblown, exuding confidence without arrogance. At first, I assumed he was another wealthy customer stopping by for coffee before heading to some high-profile meeting. But when he ordered, his tone was warm, almost hesitant, as though he wasn't used to asking for things politely. "Do you recommend anything?" he asked, glancing at the menu board behind me. "The caramel latte is popular," I replied automatically, avoiding eye contact. He chuckled softly. "Popular doesn't necessarily mean good. What do you like?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that before, not really. Most people assumed they already knew what I liked based on their own expectations. But Lucas seemed genuinely interested. "I'm partial to plain black coffee," I admitted, surprising myself. "It's simple, but it gets the job done." "That sounds like my kind of drink," he said, smiling. "Let's go with that." Over the next few weeks, he became a regular, always ordering the same thing and lingering longer than necessary. We talked about books, music, dreams, things I rarely discussed with anyone else because no one ever listened. With Lucas, however, it felt different. He didn't care about my grades or my family's money or lack thereof. He saw me, flaws and all, and somehow found value in what others dismissed. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. One evening, after closing out the shop, I mustered the courage to ask him why he kept coming back. Was it pity? Curiosity? Something else entirely? He leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "Honestly, Emma, I come here because you intrigue me. You're smart, funny, and incredibly hardworking. Not many people can balance school, work, and life the way you do. I admire that." His words hit me like a tidal wave, washing away years of doubt and insecurity. Here was someone who valued me not for what I owned or achieved, but simply for being me. Of course, I didn't know then how fleeting that feeling would turn out to be. Nor could I predict the storm brewing on the horizon, ready to rip apart everything I held dear. All I knew was that, for the first time, I mattered to someone. And that made all the difference. At first, I thought bringing Lucas home would be a turning point. Finally, my parents would see me in a new light, not as a forgotten child, but as someone capable of attracting a man who was kind, intelligent, and successful. But I was wrong. So very wrong. It started subtly, with their initial reaction when I introduced him at dinner one evening. My mother's eyes narrowed ever so slightly as she appraised Lucas from head to toe. "So, Lucas," she began, her tone deceptively sweet, "what does your family do for a living?" He smiled politely, unfazed by her probing question. "My father runs a logistics company, and my mother is involved in charity work." "Nothing too extravagant. Logistics, you say?" My father leaned forward, his interest piqued. "That must mean you're quite well off." Lucas shrugged modestly. "We get by comfortably, yes?" I watched as my parents exchanged a glance of silent agreement that sent a chill down my spine. They weren't seeing Lucas as a person anymore, they were sizing him up like a prize to be won. And I knew exactly what came next. The following week, I overheard snippets of conversation between my parents about hiring private investigators to dig into Lucas's background. Apparently, comfortably getting by wasn't enough. They needed proof of his wealth and social standing before deciding whether he was worthy of our family, or rather, Sophia's family. One night during dinner, my mother turned to me with an expression that could only be described as condescending. "Emma, dear," she said, placing her fork down deliberately, "don't put too much faith in men, especially ones like Lucas. People like him, well, let's just say they don't usually stay loyal to girls like you." Her words hit me like a slap across the face. Girls like me. Not good enough. Never good enough. Sophia sat quietly beside me, sipping her wine with a smug smile playing on her lips. She didn't need to say anything, her silence spoke volumes. Things escalated quickly after that. Sophia wasted no time making her move. Within days, she began orchestrating elaborate plans to insert herself into Lucas's life. First, it was an invitation to a high-profile gala, an event I couldn't possibly afford to attend without maxing out my credit card. When I hesitated, Sophia gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Emma," she cooed. "You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. It's going to be so boring." But of course, she made sure Lucas attended. She showed up in a designer gown that hugged her figure perfectly. Her hair styled in loose waves that framed her flawless face. To anyone watching, she looked like royalty. Beside her, I felt invisible. Over the next few weeks, Sophia grew bolder. She started texting Lucas under the pretense of needing advice, or help with something trivial, a flat tire, a broken zipper, anything that required his attention. Each time, she managed to sound innocent and vulnerable, playing the role of a damsel in distress to perfection. I tried to ignore the growing unease in my chest, telling myself that Lucas wouldn't fall for her act. He cared about me, didn't he? Yet, doubts crept in. One afternoon, while scrolling through Sophia's phone, she had left it unattended. I stumbled upon a message she'd sent to her best friend, "Just a few more months, and Lucas will be down on one knee proposing to me. Poor Emma doesn't stand a chance against me." My hands trembled as I read the words over and over again. Betrayal burned in my throat, hot and bitter. How could she do this to me? After everything we'd been through together, how could she stab me in the back like this? But the worst part wasn't even Sophia's betrayal, it was knowing that my own parents were cheering her on behind the scenes. The breaking point came one evening when my father called me into his study. His office always intimidated me with its dark wood paneling and heavy leather chairs. As I stepped inside, he gestured for me to sit, his expression unreadable. "Emma," he began, folding his hands on the desk, "we need to talk about Lucas." I braced myself, already dreading where this conversation was headed. "He's a fine young man, no doubt about that," he continued. "But let's be realistic here. Someone like him, he needs someone who can match his lifestyle. Someone sophisticated, polished. Someone like Sophia." His words sliced through me like a knife. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying you should step aside, Emma," he said bluntly. "For everyone's sake. You're not suited for someone like Lucas. You'll only embarrass yourself and us if you keep clinging to him." Each syllable felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell him how wrong he was. But instead, I sat there frozen, unable to form a coherent response. When I finally found my voice, all I could manage was a shaky, "Why does it always have to be her? Why am I never good enough?" My father sighed, as if my pain was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Life isn't fair, Emma. Sometimes you have to accept your place and move on." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying my father's words in my mind. Accept my place. Move on. As if my entire existence was meant to revolve around Sophia to serve as her shadow, her backup plan, her afterthought. The injustice of it all consumed me. For years, I had tried to prove myself, to earn their approval, to show them that I was worth something. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And now, they expected me to give up the one thing that made me feel alive, the one person who had ever truly seen me for who I was. As anger bubbled beneath the surface, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let them win. Not this time. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, Lucas being busier than usual. But as days turned into weeks, the signs became impossible to ignore. His texts grew shorter, his excuses more frequent. "Sorry, Emma. Work is insane right now," he'd say, his voice distant over the phone. Or worse, he wouldn't respond at all, leaving me staring at my screen for hours, waiting for a reply that never came. Then there were the canceled plans. Dinners we had planned for weeks would suddenly be postponed because of some last-minute meeting. When I asked him about it later, he brushed me off with a laugh. "You're overthinking things, Em. You know how crazy my schedule can get." But deep down, I knew something was wrong. My instincts screamed at me to confront him, to demand answers. Yet every time I tried, I froze. What if I was wrong? What if I made things worse by accusing him without proof? My suspicions reached a breaking point one rainy evening, when I saw Sophia stepping out of Lucas's car. They were parked near the cafe where we used to meet, the same spot where he once told me. I intrigued him. She leaned in close, whispering something that made him chuckle. Her hand lingered on his arm before she finally stepped back and walked away, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as I watched them from across the street, hidden beneath the shadow of an awning. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did they think I was stupid enough not to notice? Summoning every ounce of courage, I crossed the street and approached him. "Lucas," I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "What's going on?" He turned to face me, startled. For a split second, guilt flickered across his features, but then it vanished, replaced by irritation. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I shot back, my heart pounding. "Why was Sophia in your car?" His expression hardened. "Are you seriously spying on me now? This is ridiculous. Don't turn this around on me." I snapped, tears stinging my eyes. "Answer the question, Lucas. Why is my sister sneaking around with you?" "She wasn't sneaking anywhere," he retorted coldly. "She needed a ride home from an event. That's all." Stop jumping to conclusions. But his words felt hollow, rehearsed. And the way he avoided looking me in the eye only confirmed what I feared most. He was lying. The betrayal hit its peak during my mother's birthday party, a lavish affair held at our family estate. Guests filled the grand ballroom, dressed in their finest attire, while waiters circulated with trays of champagne. Laughter echoed through the room, mingling with the soft strains of classical music. It should have been a night of celebration, but for me, it felt suffocating. I arrived late, deliberately avoiding Lucas and Sophia. I didn't want to see them together. Didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of watching me squirm. But fate had other plans. Midway through the evening, my father tapped a spoon against his glass to silence the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming. "We have an important announcement to make tonight." My stomach dropped. Beside him, Lucas stood tall and composed, his hand firmly clasped around Sophia's. The sight of them together sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. "As many of you know," my father continued, gesturing toward Lucas, "our family has always valued tradition, loyalty, and unity. Tonight, we celebrate the beginning of a new chapter, one that will bring two remarkable families even closer together." Before I could process his words, Lucas stepped forward, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on me. There was no warmth in his eyes, no hint of regret, just cold determination. "Emma," he began, his tone formal and detached, "I owe you an apology for leading you on, for making you believe there was something between us that wasn't real. But the truth is," he paused, glancing briefly at Sophia before continuing, "I found someone who truly understands me, someone who fits into my world perfectly. Someone like Sophia." The room erupted into applause, cheers ringing out as Sophia beamed beside him. My parents clapped enthusiastically, their faces glowing with pride. My mother leaned over to whisper something to a friend, her lips curling into a smug smile. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The weight of their betrayal crushed me, stealing the air from my lungs. All around me, people murmured approvingly, their pitying glances cutting deeper than any insult ever could. And then, as if sensing my despair, Lucas added one final blow. Emma, I hope you'll understand. This isn't personal, it's just practical. Practical. The word echoed in my ears, sharp and cruel. Practical meant I wasn't good enough. Practical meant I didn't belong. When the initial shock wore off, rage took its place. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tear apart the perfect facade they had built around themselves. But instead, I turned and ran, pushing past stunned guests and ignoring their calls behind me. Rain poured down as I stumbled outside, soaking my dress and plastering my hair to my face. Thunder rumbled in the distance, matching the storm raging inside me. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the ground itself was conspiring against me. At a crosswalk, I hesitated, blinded by tears and rain. A car screeched to a halt mere inches from me, its horn blaring angrily. I barely registered the driver yelling something unintelligible, before stumbling backward onto the sidewalk. For a moment, I considered letting the next car hit me. What did it matter anymore? My life felt shattered beyond repair. Everything I had believed in, love, family, trust, had been ripped away, leaving only emptiness behind. But then, amidst the chaos, a spark ignited within me. It started small, flickering uncertainly like a match in the wind. But as I sat there, drenched and broken, it grew stronger. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. If they thought they could destroy me, they were wrong. By the time I reached home, my resolve had solidified. I packed a suitcase with whatever clothes I could grab, stuffing essentials into a backpack. I left a note for my parents, not out of obligation, but because I owed it to myself to sever ties cleanly. To whom it may concern, I wrote, my handwriting shaky but determined, I'm leaving. Don't try to find me. You've made it clear that I don't belong here. From now on, I'm choosing a life where I'm valued not for what I own or achieve, but for who I am. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I was free to build a future on my own terms. And so, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fierce determination burning inside me, I walked away from everything I had ever known. The first few months after leaving home were the hardest. I had no safety net, no one to turn to when the world felt like it was closing in on me. The city I moved to was cold and unforgiving, its streets bustling with strangers who didn't care about my pain. But that's exactly what I needed: distance, anonymity, a fresh start. I rented a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. It was barely big enough for a bed, a desk, and a small kitchenette, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space where no one could tell me how to live or judge me for failing to meet their expectations. I sold everything I owned that reminded me of my old life: the clothes Sophia had mocked, the jewelry my mother had given me to use for now. With the money I earned, I bought essentials and started saving for tuition. To make ends meet, I worked double shifts at a cafe during the day and cleaned offices at night. My hands were perpetually dry from the harsh chemicals, and my feet ached from standing for hours. But I didn't complain. Every dollar I earned felt like a step toward reclaiming my dignity. At night, when the exhaustion hit hardest, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and write in my journal. Some nights, the words poured out like a flood, angry, raw, unfiltered. Other times, I simply scribbled fragments of thoughts, snippets of dreams I hoped to achieve someday. Writing became my therapy, a way to process the pain and remind myself why I couldn't give up. Then came the letter that changed everything: an acceptance email from a prestigious university, offering me a full scholarship based on my academic achievements. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, tears streaming down my face. This was proof not just to them, but to myself that I was capable of greatness. A year passed and life began to settle into a rhythm. I threw myself into my studies, determined to excel. Between classes, work, and internships, I hardly had time to think about the past. But occasionally, whispers of Sophia and Lucas drifted back to me through mutual acquaintances or social media updates. At first, I ignored them, unwilling to let their lives intrude on mine. But curiosity eventually got the better of me. What I discovered shocked me. Sophia, once the golden girl destined for perfection, was crumbling under the weight of her new reality. Her marriage to Lucas had turned toxic almost immediately after their honeymoon. Rumors spread about his infidelity. He was seen dining with other women at high-end restaurants, flaunting his affairs without shame. Meanwhile, Sophia was trapped in a gilded cage, forced to abandon her career ambitions to fulfill the role of a dutiful wife. Her family, too, had fallen from grace. My father's company had gone bankrupt due to poor investments, leaving them drowning in debt. Their lavish lifestyle vanished overnight, replaced by desperate attempts to maintain appearances. One rainy afternoon, as I hurried home from class, I spotted Sophia sitting alone on a park bench. She looked nothing like the confident woman I remembered. Her hair hung limply around her face, her makeup smeared as though she'd been crying. Even her posture spoke of defeat, shoulders slumped, head bowed, hands clasped tightly together. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her to face the consequences of her choices. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, felt a pang of pity. Against my better judgment, I approached her. "Sophia?" I said softly, my voice barely audible over the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement. She looked up, startled. When she recognized me, her eyes widened in shock. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, sitting down beside her. "You don't look so perfect anymore." Her lips trembled, and for a brief moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she laughed bitterly. "Perfect? That's rich coming from you. Look where being perfect got me." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rhythmic patter of rain. Eventually, she confessed everything: the loneliness, the humiliation, the constant criticism from Lucas and his family. "He hates me now," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Says I'm not the woman he thought I was. Says I've disappointed him." I didn't say anything. There was nothing I could say. Her suffering was self-inflicted, a direct result of her greed and betrayal. Still, seeing her like this stirred something inside me, an uneasy mix of satisfaction and sorrow. It wasn't long before my parents found me. They showed up unannounced at my apartment one evening, their faces pale and drawn. My mother clutched a handkerchief in trembling hands, while my father avoided meeting my gaze. "Emma," my mother began, her voice choked with emotion, "we need your help." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "After everything you've done to me? Why should I help you?" "We know we wronged you," my father interjected, his tone heavy with regret. "We treated you unfairly, pushed you aside for Sophia. We see that now, and we're sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix anything," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You chose Sophia over me. You stood by while she destroyed my life. Do you have any idea how much that hurt?" Tears streamed down my mother's face. "Please, Emma, we're begging you. Sophia is miserable, and Lucas, he's unbearable. She needs to leave him, but she won't do it without your support." I stared at them, incredulous. Did they really expect me to forgive them so easily? To swoop in and save the very people who had betrayed me? "No," I said firmly. "I won't help her. Not because I want revenge, but because it's not my responsibility to clean up your messes. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." "But what about family?" my mother pleaded. "Don't you care about us anymore?" I sighed, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Family isn't just blood. It's trust, respect, love. None of those things exist between us anymore. If you're looking for someone to blame, look in the mirror. With that, I closed the door, leaving them standing outside in the cold. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. Oh, there was still sadness, a lingering ache for the relationship I'd lost. But beneath it all was a profound sense of peace. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. In the end, their downfall wasn't my victory, it was their reckoning. And mine was the freedom to move forward, unburdened by the past. Years had passed since I last saw my family. In that time, I had transformed myself, body, mind, and soul. What started as a desperate attempt to survive had blossomed into something extraordinary. I wasn't just living, I was thriving. I became the CEO of a prominent media company, known for its innovative campaigns and bold storytelling. My name appeared in newspapers and magazines, not because of my family's wealth or connections, but because of my hard work and vision. I dressed in tailored suits, carried myself with confidence, and commanded respect wherever I went. People admired me not because they were obligated to, but because I earned it. One evening, as I prepared for an industry gala, my assistant handed me a copy of the latest business journal. On the cover was a photo of me, standing tall in a sleek black dress. Beneath the headline, "Emma Carter, rising star of modern media." For a moment, I allowed myself to feel pride, not arrogance, but quiet satisfaction. This was proof that I had built something real, something lasting. But then reality intruded. Among the stack of unread emails on my phone was one from my mother. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let them fade further into irrelevance. But curiosity, or perhaps residual guilt, got the better of me. The meeting took place at a cafe downtown, neutral ground chosen by my mother. When I arrived, I spotted them immediately, my parents sitting stiffly at a corner table, their faces pale and drawn. Sophia sat beside them, her once flawless appearance now marred by exhaustion. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening in shock. "Emma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've changed." "So have you," I replied coolly, taking a seat across from them. Though not for the better, it seems. My father cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. We didn't expect this, he admitted, gesturing vaguely toward me. Seeing you like this successful, confident, it's unsettling, Sophia finished bitterly, glaring at me. How dare you act like you're better than us? I raised an eyebrow, amused to spite myself. Better? That's not what this is about. It's about choices. You made yours, and I made mine. If anything, I should thank you for showing me exactly who I didn't want to be. Sophia flinched, her hands clutching the edge of the table. You think you're so perfect now? What gives you the right to judge me? I'm not judging you, I said softly, leaning forward. But I am done enabling your mistakes. Do you remember what you told me years ago? About how Lucas would kneel and propose to you while I stood in your shadow. Well, look where that got you. He left you, didn't he? Just like everyone else will when they realize you're empty inside. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't soften. Not this time. You had everything, she sobbed. Why couldn't you just stay out of my way? Because life isn't fair, Sophia. I shot back. And neither am I. You chose this path, the lies, the manipulation, the greed. Now live with the consequences. She slammed her fist on the table, her composure cracking. You're cruel. You used to care about me. No. I corrected, my voice steady. I used to be weak. But I'm not anymore. My parents watched the exchange in silence, their faces etched with shame and regret. Finally, my father spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma, please, we're begging you. Help Sophia. She's lost everything, her marriage, her dignity, even her sense of self-worth. Without you, she has nothing left. I turned to him, my expression impassive. And whose fault is that? Yours. Hers? Not mine. You treated me like I was disposable, like I didn't matter. Did you really think I'd come running back to fix your messes? But your family? My mother cried, tears streaming down her face. Family forgives each other. I shook my head, feeling a pang of sadness but also clarity. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by trust, loyalty, love. None of those things exist between us anymore. If you're looking for someone to blame, look in the mirror. My father sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Please forgive us, Emma. We were wrong. So wrong. We see that now. Part of me wanted to believe him, to forgive and forget. But forgiveness wasn't enough, not for wounds this deep. I don't hate you, I said finally, my tone measured. But I can't forgive you either. I've moved on. I've built a life, a real one, with people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I don't need you anymore. When the confrontation ended, I walked away without looking back. They called after me, their voices pleading. But I kept moving. Each step felt lighter, freer, as though I was shedding the weight of decades worth of pain and resentment. Later that week, I sent them an invitation to my wedding, a simple card with elegant lettering. Inside, I wrote only 3 words, no expectations, no regrets. They never responded. As for Sophia, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she spiraled further into despair. Without Lucas or our family's support, she crumbled under the pressure of her own failures. Her once perfect facade shattered completely, leaving behind a shell of the woman she used to be. Meanwhile, I embraced my new life with open arms. I married a kind, supportive man who loved me unconditionally, and together we started a family. Our home was filled with laughter, warmth, and genuine connection, the kind I had always longed for but never received from my own parents. Every now and then, I thought about them, the family I had left behind. But instead of anger or bitterness, I felt pity. Pity for their inability to see beyond their own selfishness, for the emptiness they had created in their relentless pursuit of perfection. In the end, I realized something profound. Strength isn't about holding grudges or seeking revenge. It's about rising above the pain, about choosing to build a future that reflects the best version of yourself. And that's exactly what I did.